All right, welcome everybody. All right, it's about 3:01. I hope everyone can hear me. If you can't, go ahead and put something in the chat box there. Um, my name is Pam Schwartz. I'm the Chief Curator of the Orange County Regional History Center in downtown Orlando. I don't know if everybody is local, if you're from afar. I recognize some names on our list and others not. So thanks for joining us. You'll have to bear with us a little bit. The webinars are a little new to us. I have two dogs and a partner. You'll see him over here behind me. If the dogs start barking, I apologize. There's no escaping them. They bark at everything. They're good guard dogs. I'd go outside, but I have really obnoxious birds in the backyard. So please bear with me. I don't have a studio at home, but this is all for safe social distancing. And hopefully this will be interesting and enjoyable for you. So again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope everybody has checked out our website. We have some really great resources listed there. It's our History from Home series that we've launched especially for this quarantine period, which sounds like it's going to be going on a little bit longer for Florida and hopefully the whole nation, and trying to do our part to flatten this curve. So we're going to be bringing you a lot of really great offerings. This is sort of kicking it off. This is Genealogy 101. It is by no means meant to be a fully extensive course. It's meant to be short and interesting and hopefully get you started or give you some new ideas if you are already doing genealogy. A couple things about this webinar. Some of you have already noticed the chat feature. You can certainly put some messages in. You should also see something that's called Q&A. If you have a question, go ahead and put that in there. Everybody else is on mute. I don't have your video and I don't have your audio, so I can't see you if you're raising a hand or anything. Just go ahead and put your questions in one of those places. And then I'm going to come back at the end to get those. It's going to be, I think, too hard for me to try to read and manage and keep speaking. So we'll just see how it goes. But I promise to get to as many of your questions as possible. You should have, if you pre-registered for this panel, you should have received an email that had some of the resources and also a blank family history chart. Those are also available on our History at Home page. And if you have any issues navigating to those or finding them, just let us know and we'll be sure to help you out. So sitting at home, I always say that I wish I could retire. I have a lot of hobbies and genealogy is one of them. But during this quarantine time, we're all spending a little bit more time at home. And so it's actually an excellent time to think about it. So if you've already watched way more television than you'd like, maybe you've watched every episode of Downton Abbey or Tiger King, I guess is a show right now, or anything like that. I want to give you something new to get addicted to, generally speaking. So genealogy or family history. Again, I can't necessarily talk to all our participants, so some of you may be more new to this than others. But this is definitely an activity that you can do on your own, or you can do it with your friends, your family, from a safe distance right now. But if you're in the home with a significant other, children, grandchildren, and this is something you can actually kind of do via Zoom or through a phone call or something like that as well. So it's definitely a family-friendly activity, and it's a really fun opportunity to explore. And the one thing I will warn you about is it is a little addictive. You'll get going and you'll just get hungry to learn more about your family and your roots and where you come from. And so hopefully your curiosity will continue to grow. So I'm going to try to be fancy with this technology, and I'm going to do a screen share. So bear with me. I have some slides and stuff that I also want to share with you. Let me see if I can figure this out. I hope everyone can see that. It should be a PowerPoint instead of my face. I didn't want you to have to look at me the entire time. So this is sort of Genealogy 101, and that is exactly the history of you and your whole family. So a little bit of a background. I started doing genealogy absolutely by accident when I was just 14 years old. To make a very, very, very long story short, I stumbled on a story of my ancestor's wedding from the 1890s. The 1890s, so that would be like my second great relative, second great aunts. I was working at a local history museum and was copying a book, and I saw this name Taplin. And I thought that was strange. That was my grandparents' name, my mom's parents. And I took a copy home. I said, Mom, is this us? Is this our family? And she said, well, yeah, actually, I think it is. So it turns out this was my second great uncle and his wife to be. They were super popular folks, naturally. They had a huge celebration. Newspapers at the time claimed that there was more people than they'd seen in one place in a long time. In the 1890s, keep in mind, there aren't any cars. Everyone's traveling by foot, by hoof, or by carriage. So it was really interesting because I started coming across all of these articles. Excuse me. After the wedding that was held between my relatives, people started getting sick and dying. Was it the ham salad? Maybe it was typhus from my second great uncle's mother-in-law's pressed chicken, or maybe some sort of airborne disease. Either way, I was absolutely fascinated. I couldn't learn enough about this, like sort of macabre and sad, but at the same time, like this was my family, and who died and what happened really. And so you'll see that on the left is the whole front page of the Clinton Weekly Age. Now, I grew up in Iowa, and my whole family, since we've been in this country, on all sides of my family, have been in the same area of Iowa. And that far left column, which I've made a zoom in on the right-hand side for you, of the article that talks about this. Now, they never fully figured out what this was, but like 20 some or 30 some people actually ended up dying in the end, and 50 others getting sick. It was a really, really sad story. But like I said, I was absolutely hooked. And I sort of learned about this researching my family. At the time, I don't think I knew it was called genealogy, but it was just something that was really, really fascinating. And I started asking more questions of my family, of my parents, of my grandparents, who I was really fortunate to have. My grandmother's all into their 90s. And so I just began researching, and I've been doing this ever since. So I'm really bad at math. 18 years, 19 years, I don't know. That's a bunch of years I've been working on this. But we all have to start someplace. I've traced certain parts of my family back into the 1300s, living on an island off the north of Germany called Femmen. But I want to show you from one of the very first articles I found in doing my genealogy. This is where I'm at now. So I, with another cousin who I did not know until I got into genealogy, we are starting to put together a book. We have been working for years and years to collect things. And this is a genealogy life goal here is to make a book like this. You don't have to go this far. So don't let this sway you. It can be as fun as just finding a document here or there, or learning more about your family. But from all the years I've been doing this, I've just started to put things all together. And these are samples that I'm going to present to some of my family members. And the purpose of that is to try to get them to give us more information and more stuff. And I'm talking relatives from like my fifth cousin in Canada and my seventh cousin in Australia, and trying to connect with them. So this is just an example of what research can turn into, but don't be scared at how much this is. So these are my second great grandparents, Thomas and Elizabeth. Elizabeth died very young. And so my grandfather, who, these are my second greats. So my great grandfather, who in the photo on the bottom, the lower right hand, the gentleman sitting, that's my great grandfather, Allie. I never got to meet him, but he was not raised by his mother because she died when he was just 2. On the right, you'll see I've done sort of I've written a biography of their life, of everything I've learned about them. There's a copy of a census record from, I think that one's from 1880. And then their second page that I've created for them is just sort of a collage. And this is a work in progress. It's not done yet. But it's sort of a collage of different types of things that you might come across when you're doing your family history. And so I just wanted to offer that as an example, just to like walk through, just to give you some ideas. So this upper left-hand corner with the blue boxes, that is an 1893 map of where my the people who you just saw, Thomas and Elizabeth. Um, Thank you, Stephanie. She says this looks fantastic. I appreciate that. Um, this 1893 map shows me where my family property was. My great-great-grandfather was a pretty prosperous guy, considering they'd come from nothing in England. His parents and his parents before them had worked fealty under the king, and one of them had even died of dysentery eating in a soup kitchen. So definitely a change in fortune when they came to America. The lower left corner, this is a horse ad. You'll see Thomas Taplin in the lower right corner. He was in charge of buying and selling horses. And so this was an advertisement he put out. Really cool stuff to find. This is not stuff my family had. It's stuff that I found along the way. You'll see a couple of obituaries on this page. Those are the newspaper articles. On the right-hand side, that top thing is a watch fob. I had no idea, but I found out my uncle actually had gotten this passed down. But this was from a fraternal order that my great-great-grandfather was in. The middle item there is really sad. That is the funeral card for my great-great-grandmother. You'll see she was like, what was it, 41, I think, when she passed. Below that is the actual baptism. It's kind of cut off on my screen. Hopefully it shows up better on yours. But that is the actual baptism record for my second great-grandfather in England. So really cool. You'll see we've got a headstone. So just a lot of different types of things that you can possibly see. So I'm going to come back to me for a minute. I hope this is working. Bear with me. If not, leave me a comment. So those are just some examples of the work I've done. And I wanted to give you a little bit of background because, again, I don't know how far, if any of you are brand new, this is Genealogy 101, or if you're a little bit more advanced, in which case I'm happy to do more of these webinars. You can leave us in the comments or leave questions and answers to let us know if you want more of this similar type of thing. So kind of a fun fact about this as we get more into doing genealogy instead of talking about it. Does anybody know how many 10th grade grandparents you have? I think this is a fascinating fact. You have 4,096 10th grade grandparents. That's amazing. So my last name is Schwartz, but my parents are Schwartz and Taplin. They're Schwartz and Johnson and Taplin and higher. Schwartz, Johnson, Taplin, Weimer, Skirch, blah, 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 blah. So every generation you go back, it's exponential, right? So you have two parents. We have a question I'm going to answer in line from Rick. It's, what does 10th grade mean? So if you're going to start your family tree, you start with you. Okay, so here's me. And then I wish I could draw on the screen. I'd probably do it backwards anyway, though. So there's me, and then there's two parents, my 4 grandparents, my 8 great-grandparents, my 16 great-great. So that would be my second great, right? Because there's 2 greats. Then you go to 3rd great, that's great-great-great-grandparents. So every time you go up a generation, you add a great, right? So 10th great grandparents means they're like, actually, let's see, it would be second, third, like 12 generations removed from you, because you've got your parents, your grandparents, and then a bunch of other sets of grandparents in there. So you have, when you get up to 10 generations behind you into history, you've got 4,096 of those people. I'm not going to talk much about genealogy and DNA today. That's a different webinar. But every time people have a child, the child gets 50% of each of their DNA. That means you have a little bit of each of those 4,000 people's DNA and story in you, in your family history. And so that's all just really, really, really interesting to me. That's a lot of stories to uncover. Chances of getting back that far on all those lines aren't very good. But every decision that those individuals have made and every experience that they've had has brought one step closer to where you are today. If you think about your life and how you got to be where you're at, it's probably somewhat a result of your parents and your grandparents and the decisions made before them. So here in Central Florida, we're really lucky to have a lot of great resources at our fingertips. Some of those actually we're getting better access to during this quarantine. Excuse me, this quarantine period. We have archives and research library at the History Center, which has a lot of really amazing resources. Unfortunately, we're closed for quarantine. So some of the sites you can't visit, but we do have some different online options, again, in that resource guide. But we're here to talk about couch projects, not going out and going places. I'm trying to help you stay at home and be safe and be well. So, you know, put on your fresh pajamas and make yourself a cup of tea. And we're going to talk a little bit more later about all the different things that are open to you on the internet right now, stuff that you can truly be doing from home. Next, I'm going to go into sort of the genealogy basics. But I do want to tell you first and foremost that we have a Central Florida Genealogical Society here. Now, some people have the misconception, they hear Central Florida Genealogical Society, and they assume that that means that's only for people doing research of a family here, like you have to be in Central Florida. No, it's a genealogical society that's in Central Florida, right? So they have people who have backgrounds, because we've all only ever been from Central Florida for so long, right? We all came from someplace else at some point. So it's just it's a group of individuals who are passionate about doing genealogy. They have tons of meetings every single year. Not right now, but Elaine Hatfield Powell, who is the president, is tearing it up on their social media. Above and beyond our resources, I really recommend you look at their Facebook page and even join the society, because they have meetings for different groups. So if you're Irish, they have an Irish special interest group that will go back to meeting eventually. But a lot of really skilled people who are really anxious and happy to help you in your own journey as well. It's a really good group. So that's something you should check out, the Central Florida Genealogical Society. I see we have some questions coming in. I'll get back to those, I promise. The Central Florida Genealogical Society Facebook, Elaine has been posting really great resources every single day. I think today she even posted a link with some resources specifically for doing genealogy with kids. So I definitely recommend that you check that page out. So I'm gonna pop back over to my slides here and give a little bit of a starter lesson for anybody who's truly a novice. Oh, that's the one we already saw. Here we go. So maybe you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by all the information I've already discussed. Don't be. It's so easy just to get started, because what you're going to start with is what you already know best. So we're going to dial it back a little bit. You should have received that blank family tree chart. That's what you see on the right of your screen here. Excuse me. That first place, if you're doing this with a child or a grandchild, you can start with them, or you can start with yourself and just know you can add them in later. But that's the first place to start, and you can fill this out on your computer, or if you have a printer, you can go ahead and print that out. If you don't like the way this one is set up, just Google it. There are a ton of different different options out there for sure. But just sit down with a pen and paper and fill out what you know. So you're going to start with yourself, your name, your full name, where you were born, when, if you're married or not, died. Oh, obviously you haven't died, but whoever you're starting with. And as you go through that tree, so you're the first line, your parents are the next, and then your grandparents. So you can just start filling these out. Now, inevitably, you're going to get to a hole that you yourself don't know. Maybe you're fortunate enough to still have your parents around, in which case call them. Have them help fill in as much as you know, or an aunt, an uncle, a grandma, a grandpa. Just get all of the information from your own knowledge bank, and then everything else you can continue to build on that. So just start there. That's it. There's a few little tips and hints about keeping information that I want to share with you. And it might not seem necessarily like beginner level stuff, but if you start doing it the right way, it is going to make your life exponentially easier as you go forward in doing genealogy. So when you are recording men, you can just record their name. If you're recording women throughout history, you always record them by their maiden name. okay? Because they'll almost always end up on the chart next to whoever their husband was. So yes, their name changed. You're going to find documents eventually with their name on it, but you already have the man's name recorded. So you'll see it's always kind of kept together. If you start using any online programs, you definitely want to put in the maiden name for any women, because it will automatically tie the two names together and search for both of those. But it's a lot easier to keep track of it. Now, for me, it was really hard to get along with at first, because my grandma Taplin was my grandma Taplin. And so when I had to start looking at her name as Rosanna Heyer, I was like, oh, every time I couldn't quite like recognize it was her I was thinking about. So it is a bit of a learning curve that way. But you also want to write down dates a very specific way. You know, here in America, we have a tendency to write the month / the date / the year. In Europe, they often, or in other countries, they often change the order. So they'll do date, month, year. So if you put 12/6/1999, for us, that's December 6th, 1999. But for other countries, they might read that as June 12th, 1999. So you'll see my example here in the middle. I wrote down my grandfather, Allison James Taplin, born 19th June 1922, died 5 April 1999. Always format your dates that way, and always use a 4-year date, because it's 2020, but you might start looking at 1920 in your research, or even get as far back as 1820, right? So if you're only putting 20, it starts to get a little bit murky. So always try to follow these sorts of rules, right? Now, when you're talking about places, you can break those down in a variety of ways also. But for him, he lived in Sebula, which actually I should have done more here, but Sebula, Jackson County, Iowa, USA. Because keep in mind, Sebula is not as common, but Clinton, there's probably a Clinton in a bunch of different states, right? So being very thorough with your information. So this is sort of the really quick basic down and dirty, right? Just get the information that you already inherently sort of have and that you can get before you ever start thinking about research. People can get really eager to start getting on the internet and doing some things, but try to get your ducks in a row. And keep in mind, memory's not infallible. So you might ask your grandma when her mom was born and she gives you a date. It might not be the right date. Sometimes it's hard to remember those things a long time down the way. So that'll lead me to some points later. So again, this might seem a little bit overwhelming, but these are sort of some tips. Just get organized. Start writing things down. Keep everything in one place. I don't know. I'm glad you all can't see my desk here because it's not great. It's a mess. I have a lot of different projects, but get a folder or like, you know, one of those reusable grocery bags that's like your genealogy bag, and keep everything in one place. You're going to want to collect local sources and documents. You can't do that right now. You know, you can't run off to the History Center or, you know, to the West Oaks Library branch that has a lot of great stuff. But you can save it to your desktop. And if you're not a computer person, print it out, keep it, then you can look at it. But make sure you just continue to try to organize your data. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. I have in my family genealogy folder on my computer, I have my family genealogy, and then there's a Schwartz folder and a Taplin folder. I broke it up between my parents to keep it easier. And then in each one of those folders, I have a folder for each couple. So every time I move back a generation, that couple gets a folder together. All of the stuff for their generation, their kids, goes into that folder unless it's my direct descendant. So you have to figure out what works for you. Some people have big binders. I'll show you my binder actually when I go back off of screen share, that I've been working on. So that's a big thing though, is collect, and get organized. We were talking a little bit about relationships. You know, what is your 10th great grandpa? Some people, I always laugh because I can never remember it either. What's a second cousin? What's a second cousin 4 times removed and blah, blah, blah. This is not genealogy 101 information. Do not worry about it just yet. Um, I'm showing it to you just because it's really interesting and it's something that you might want to learn. You know, you don't always want to just go backwards in genealogy. I have really done a lot of focusing on finding cousins that exist right now. And part of that is because if one person or one couple has 8 kids, family items, photographs, heirlooms get brought down the generations in a lot of different ways. So my 5th cousin's 4th, whatever's removed, they might have a horse collar from my great-great-great-grandpa or something like that. And I would never know it existed unless I found them. Now we have digital photos. We can send them back and forth. But before, there might have only ever been one photo in existence of my 2nd great-grandparents. And who knows which one of the kids got that. So it can really be good to not only go backwards in your family line, but look at your aunts and uncles and do some research too. If at any point you're wondering how somebody might be related, you can look up a genealogy relationship chart on Google. There's a lot there. But you can see when it gets out to these 3rd cousins 3 times removed and 5th cousins 3 times removed, it can get really confusing really fast. So my root rules, for doing genealogy: write all your information down, get organized. Sourcing. Sourcing is the most important thing. So what you hear from, you know, the horse's mouth is one thing, but as you start to do more research online, you need to make sure that what you're looking at is accurate. So there's accepted documents. So think of like marriage certificates. And that doesn't mean sometimes they don't get the dates wrong. Census records often have misspellings or have ages wrong or have a lot of different funky things going on. So some stuff you should use more as a guide than as a resource. Birth certificates, death certificates, obituaries, all of these things are different types of documents you might encounter that have really interesting bits. But I always recommend you get at least 2 sources for every bit of information if you can, because that's just going to help to prove that it's true. Consistency. So staying consistent in how you're writing dates and how you're writing places and how you're addressing people. You'll find that sometimes, a lot of times, people didn't go by their names. My great-grandparents were Joseph Matthias Heyer and Margareta Katharina Weimerskirch. What a heck of a name. But they went by Joe and Kate. And then later he decided to go by Matthias. So like tracking people is kind of a fun challenge sometimes. Another thing I can't stress enough is to take your time. It can get really, really exciting to do this kind of research and just to want to zip, zip, zip all the way back into the 17 and 1600s. I usually challenge people, if somebody gives me up through their grandparents, I can usually take them 6 to 7 generations in less than 30 minutes. But that's just for fun. When you're doing actual genealogy, take your time. Really focus on one generation at a time. So if you're going to go into a 1920 census record, try to find every family member in that record that you're going to find, because once you exhaust it, you can forget about looking in those records, right? You don't have to keep going back and relearning different sources. Take your time and be really systematic about, you know, who should be where, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know about the time period, right? And what you find one family member in, you might find another. So again, this is a little bit more about starting with your family. That's not just asking questions, but everybody probably has a shoebox of stuff, right? In some cases, people have had fires or different things, so they might not. But ask questions of your family members, cousins, aunts, uncles. Look through some of those family albums and scrapbooks. You might see a picture of Frank. Well, who's Frank? You know, try to get that figured out. So use those little clues. These are some of the lessons that I've learned in getting started with genealogy. As I've said, research one generation thoroughly at a time. Sourcing goes into this next thing, making solid connections as you move from generation to generation. If you find one document for Catherine Heyer and it lists her parents, make sure that is your Catherine Heyer. Names have been popular throughout time. So a lot of times you'll find 7 Sarah Taplins living in the same state at the same time. So you need to verify, and that's part of finding multiple sources. We already talked about maiden names, 4-digit years. I'm going to talk in a second about all of the great online resources you can get started with. One of those is ancestry.com, and you can actually view other people's family trees. So you might like automatically find a cousin and be able to look at their tree and think you've got it made, like, oh my gosh, somebody's done this work for me. There are a lot of people really bad at genealogy on the internet. Keep that in mind. You want to resource your own stuff. It doesn't mean you can't look at their things and check, but you should check and verify their resources. So don't get too excited. Take your time. If you find documents you think might be your family member, but you can't prove it yet, make sure you keep that because it might come to be a thing. But keep it labeled and in a separate folder so that you don't get those two things confused. And, you know, one of the reasons you want to be really careful when looking at other people's trees or not sourcing properly, I have known people who have spent years doing genealogy for a family that wasn't theirs. They mixed up, they didn't verify one generation, and they went on and for a couple hundred years of, you know, in the research, and it ended up that they had made a mistake and it wasn't even their family. So be very careful. And the last thing I sort of mentioned, you don't know what you don't know. So we can all think, okay, census records, marriage, death, et cetera, all these like sort of typical records. But when you get into other countries, you don't know what kind of things existed. For instance, in Ireland, the Irish potato famine was a reason a lot of people chose to migrate, and there's different records. So by researching the time period your family lived in another country, you might think, oh my gosh, was my family member in that war? Or was his house in this fire in this town? So don't only research people, you can also research places. We already talked about all that. I see somebody had some questions or some comments about DNA. I'll come back to that. But this is another thing that's really big is some of you have maybe done your like DNA test through Ancestry or 23andMe or one of the other companies. And that's really fun. And you can learn a lot. And it's good supplement to doing your family history. But that really is a whole nother like 15 webinars. But if that's something you're interested in, definitely do go ahead and, you know, leave us a comment on that. So I'm going to stop the share. So I want to talk briefly here about doing this from home. So I've talked a bit about some rules, how you get started. But okay, so you write that piece of paper, then what do you do? Again, during quarantine, so there's a lot of free services, there's paid services if you're doing this online. If you want to do it the old-fashioned way, my great aunt Gladys was alive till she was 100 years old. And when I used to show her things on the internet, she would get so mad because she said, I used to have to go to that cemetery in the middle of winter and walk around and find those graves. And now you just type a name in Google. So it's definitely gotten a lot easier for us. And here, let me show you. This is one of my genealogy binders. I have a little tab for every generation of people. And when you look inside, I don't know why I'm holding it sideways. You'll see, this is backwards. Okay, photographs. This is my old version. Now I'm trying to make that into the new version. We've got World War II service records, headstones. This is a little booklet my sister made that had a biography of my grandparents in it when she was in like 6th grade, but cute stories. So there's all sorts of different stuff. This is how I first started getting organized, right? So you can do it in a variety of different ways. And now, you know, I'm designing that big book, but this is where it started. So you can do it by hand, but during quarantine, you're not going to have the opportunity to go to courthouses and go to places. And also when you think of how expensive, like you can't just pick up and go to, well, some of us can't just pick up and fly to Germany or fly to England when we're doing research. So the internet's really helped with that. So right now, the Central Florida Genealogical Society Facebook page has a ton of great resources. We've provided you with that resource list. The most well-known sites that I think about, everyone thinks about Ancestry.com. It's sort of like the holy grail of these genealogy sites, but there is a paywall. You can go in and put a family tree in for free. So you can start to build it in there and it'll do it nice and electronic and you can print some things off, but you can't actually use a lot of their resources unless you buy a subscription, and it is expensive. If it's something you really want to get into, that's fine. But I would really recommend it while you're getting started, you make sure this isn't just like a quarantine thing and that it's something that you're really interested in. The Orange County Public Library System, anytime you want, they have Ancestry Library Edition. So the library edition is not the same as the full edition that you can just access from home and bring up all these, millions of resources that they have, and you can attach them to your tree. If people are interested, I could also do like a Ancestry library edition or ancestry.com 101 as well on like how to use those systems. But you can put a family tree in for free, but you can't access the resources. Now with the library edition, you can access the resources, you just can't like save your tree the same way. So, but when you find them, you can print them or you can download them to like your email or your USB, and then you can have them. So that's really awesome. The cooler thing is that you can do that at any of the library branches anytime, but right now with a library card, they're letting you access it from home. That is awesome. That's a huge savings. I want to say Ancestry is like a few $100s a year. I've been buying it since I was like a teenager, so I don't even pay attention anymore. It just comes off on my credit card, which is probably a bad thing. But definitely if you go to the link should be on your resource guide for how to do it. And all you need is a public library card and you can get on that, the library edition, and just start hunting around. Now, the other option, what I recommend is you start with familysearch.org. Family Search is free. It's a little bit different. You don't get you get your own family tree, but their goal is to attach everyone's tree into a mega tree, right? So sometimes people will go in and change stuff and you're like, you're not accurate. You can't touch my stuff. I'm kind of like that because I do good research. But so it's a little bit dynamic, but you can definitely go on there and start your own family tree and you can research. They don't have all the same documents as ancestry.com, but they have more than enough to get you started right now. Like you could use that site for a year first before you were ever to go pay for something else, right? You don't have to pay to do genealogy, but Ancestry is a really great resource. But try out the library edition. Make sure you like it and it's valuable to you before you do it. So those are some really great options right now. There's also some other good sites. There's on your resource list, like Cindy's list, and some different places that you can go for genealogy resources. And do not hesitate to use Google. So if you know your whole family was in Jackson County, Iowa, go Jackson County, Iowa genealogy, right? And Google, and it's going to come up with a Gen Web website and all sorts of different resources. Maybe the local historical society has their own website that has a index list to the marriage records and things like this. There's a lot of different options there for you with that. So those are just a lot of different online sites. And so let me look at some questions here. If you've got questions, feel free to put them either in the Q&A or right in the chat box is fine too. Give me a second here to scroll through just to see. We had a suggestion of a topic for DNA. Yeah, and even better, DNA and adoptions. Adoptions are tricky, but we've had some success. I did help somebody through doing a DNA test find her mother, her actual birth mother. So I'm happy to actually, for the person who asked that question, I'm happy to follow up with some other resources for you on that too. But DNA and genealogy is really fascinating and is definitely a topic I'd be glad to tackle. We had somebody ask about some of the tabs in my binder. The tabs in my binder, these are actually, I have one tab for each of the generations, right? So I separate it by people. So this first one is Allie Taplin and Mary Gertz. So those are my great grandparents. And then it's the next generation. And you'll see maybe if I do it this way, yeah, they have numbers on them. So that tells me what generation they are. This 2 tells me which generation they're from. This 3 means they're the next generation back. So I have the tabs for each family, not for like each different type of document. Again, you'll have to figure out what works for you, but I've found that this is a really great way to figure out who belongs to who in the generations and how that all works. Somebody does want an OCLS library edition webinar, so we could definitely set that up. A question about where is the resource list. So if you pre-registered, you should have gotten an email either today or yesterday with the resource list. If not, you can go to our webpage, www.thehistorycenter.org. And on the front page, we have a banner right now that says History from Home. And I can also put the link in the chat box here in a minute. But if you go to History at Home and you scroll down, there's a tab for genealogy resources. You can click that and it'll have the full page laid out for you. Yes, that's a good reminder too. So on that resource list, you'll see that I've got local resources. The Central Florida Genealogical Society has a lot of really great classes. Also, there's the Church of Latter-day Saints family, the center up on Parr Street. Courses are closed right now and classes, but they do a lot of different programming, and they have a research library as well with access to a lot of the things that you'll find on Family Search through their connections. So those are both really great. The public library has an Ancestry Library Edition, but they actually have the West Oaks branch of the library, which is out in Ocoee, and they have like a legit genealogy setup. So they have a lot of resources. They have a huge library, and that's not just for local stuff, it's genealogy. And they've got a lot of great people. Allison Ryle, who heads it up with Greg Groglin, they know their stuff. They know a lot about genealogy. They offer a ton of free courses. If you go to the Orange County Public Library website, you can actually like look at that list, and every month when we're not in quarantine, they have a ton of stuff, but they also have stuff on their website. So definitely clue in there. She knows a ton about like DNA and genealogy and that sort of stuff. And they have like courses you can enlist in for free. Really, really amazing things locally. Like this is the I've lived all over, but this is a place where I feel like you have a ton of resources at your hands. So definitely check all those resources out when we're back out of quarantine. And I'm not sure. I know the library is probably doing a ton of different programs during this time, but maybe they're doing some genealogy stuff too. So a lot of really great resources. Other questions, if you have them, please put them in the comments. I think I've addressed everything. So, well, thank you so much. I hope that this was helpful, at least like in giving you some ideas for how to get started. And we're happy, like I said, to do more of these webinars. We like to do them in person, and we've done that. We've done some classes, so stay tuned after quarantine for that as well. It's really fast. This is a huge topic. I've been working on it a long time, and I learn stuff every single day. So I'll stick around on the chat for a little bit, but if you need to fall off, go ahead. I'm happy to answer any questions and follow up on some different things, but I hope this gives you a lot to get started, and happy hunting. Find some cool stories and let us know when you do. Reach out. My email address is on the website, and I'd love to hear your stories and have you share those with us. And always happy to troubleshoot as well. Have a good afternoon. Be safe and be well.